I really want to talk about the unpopular opinion of if your team is underperforming or unproductive, it is the leader's fault. And it is your fault because it is your responsibility to go through 4 things. Have you actually been having honest conversations with the people on your team? Because the biggest reason why people continue to be unproductive or they tend to underperform is because you haven't had an honest conversation with them. The most important thing that a leader can do, and that is to make decisions. On today's show, we're going to talk about a very unpopular opinion for leaders, and I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I think this is true and things that you can do to avoid the issues that come related to this unpopular opinions. We're going to be doing a new format this season. Some episodes you're going to see where I'm going to sit down and we're going to talk about a very important topic of what it takes to help your business step into the golden age of performance, because there is a lot of different things that you could be doing. And so instead of us covering everything all at once, we're just going to break it down piece by piece. And instead of doing longer 1-hour episodes, we're going to have a lot shorter conversations so we can really get into some of the questions that people have brought in. Now, we're also going to be doing this segment that I like to call I guess you call it the unpopular opinion. And today's unpopular opinion is that if your team is underperforming or unproductive, that is the leader's fault. Now, the reason why I say this is an unpopular opinion is because a lot of leaders like to look at this and say, well, that's not really my fault if my team is underperforming. If my team is underperforming, that's really their fault because it's something they're not doing or something is going on with them. And I would take a step back and say, you know what? I really don't think it is their fault. Now, before we go any further, let me explain and provide a little bit of context of what I mean by unproductive or what I mean by underperforming. So when I say underperforming, what I mean is there is a clear standard that has been set, or you can call it an expectation, and their performance is somewhere under that standard. Now, when I say about unproductive, what I mean when I use the word unproductive is that the person we are talking about, the person we are focused on, is not making acceptable progress towards the objective or the goal that we have established. So, those are my definitions of what it means to be unproductive or what it means to underperform. Now, using those definitions is how I'll explain the 4 key areas that I think every leader should be paying attention to, or every business should be paying attention to, period. Now, the key thing to think about when I talk about being unproductive or I talk about underperforming is it starts with what is the goal? What is the objective? See, a lot of organizations struggle because they never actually set what is the goal or what is the objective. Now, to be able to really measure someone's productivity, we need to have a goal and objective. And to measure if they're underperforming, we need to know what is the standard that they should be meeting, because I don't know if you're under or over it if there is no standard. So for most organizations, that is probably why I say the goal is probably the first area that makes it the leader's responsibility, and why a underperforming person or unproductive person, it falls on the leader. It's the question I always ask is, did you set a clear goal? Now, we struggled with this in our organization a lot because, we kind of just went with the flow. Like, hey, we just wanted to be better this year than we were last year. And what I realized is we never really defined that. Like, our business was growing and we were growing by, 6 figures every year or 6 figures plus every year, which I think was great. But what I had to realize is we never really took a step back and really set a clear goal and said, hey, what are we supposed to be doing? Like, what are we aiming for? What are we targeting? And as a leader, what I had to recognize is the team didn't have a goal because I didn't do my job as a leader to really set and make it clear what that goal was. So I sat down and I looked at it and I said, okay, all right, if I am going to be able to hold the team accountable and to have conversations with them, I need to set what is our goal. Now, I started with setting our company goal. And this is how the whole golden age of business kind of framework came about, because I started with setting what is our company goal? What do we want to achieve as a company? And then we started going down the layers to say, okay, all right, if this is the company goal, what is my expectation of my manager? What is my expectation of the senior accountants? What is my expectation of the entry level staff? And then what we did is we started aligning all the standards and all the performance metrics for each person in the organization, but we made sure that it all related to the overall goal. Now, when we went through that process, and I'll be honest with you, it wasn't like a quick process we went through. I mean, it took some iterations. I mean, it took me a couple of weeks to really nail it down for everyone in the organization. But after we went through that process, now what we clearly had is we had a goal that we were working towards, and we had a standard that was set for every person in the organization. So now on a monthly basis, we can sit down in about 10 minutes. I can sit down with every staff member in the company. And at this point, we have a team of 11. So I can sit down with every person in the company and I can pull up to say, hey, here's the standard for the role that you play on the team. Where is your performance? Are you under, at, or over that target? So now we can clearly measure whether or not they are underperforming, whether they're at performance, or whether they're overperforming, because we made it clear. Now, the next thing that we started to look at is, in order to really measure productivity, what I realized is we had a huge weakness, because I could tell them that, hey, here's the goal. And I could tell them that, hey, here's the standard that you need to live up to. But one of the things that I realized is that no one is going to go from 0 to 100 on whatever goal that they're trying to achieve or whatever they're working towards. So what I had to do is take a step back and said, all right, maybe we should probably create incremental milestones. So let's say if I want you to reach this point, but you start all the way back here, maybe I'll say, hey, here's milestone 1, here's milestone 2, here's milestone 3. And if you're making progress in that direction, then I can measure whether or not you are being productive. Because every single month, every single week, we should be able to take a look at this and say, hey, are you moving in the right direction of where you need to be? And that was another reason why we started really tweaking the golden age. And that's how we came up with the concept of, hey, for every person, I know ultimately where you need to be. We set an average goal, we set a good goal, and we know what excellent looks like. And so every single month, we're having conversations helping people go from average to good to excellent. And what we did is we took every one of their goals and we said, hey, these are the 5 things that you can do as a manager that are going to help you perform excellent. Now, I know where you are today. You're probably at average at, let's say, 3 of those things. On other ones, you're probably already at the good level. So now we can have conversations about, hey, what are you doing to move from average to good? And then once you get to good, what are you doing and how can I help you move from good to excellent? By making it very, very clear to them about the goal and the milestones, we were then able to see better performance with our team. And I will say is, it took some time to really get the team into that rhythm. But once we did, the team really made a ton of progress. And so the next thing I will say is accountability, which is something you've heard me kind of talk about and allude to already. But a very, very important part of this process is really having that conversation with them. Now, I understand a lot of leaders avoid accountability for a couple of reasons. One of the biggest reasons why leaders avoid accountability is because the conversations tend to be a lot more emotional. They tend to be a lot more about their feelings. Well, I don't feel like you're as productive as you should be, or I feel like you're underperforming. And that is the worst way to run a business. Now, maybe I'm a bit biased because I run an accounting firm and we provide bookkeeping and CFO services for law firms. And I'm used to looking at the hard numbers and the facts of saying, hey, we planned to generate 3 million in revenue, but we actually generated 2.7. Like, I'm used to looking at those numbers. So when we looked at, hey, how do we bring that back into how we lead in our team and how do we lead the performance? And what we had to realize is those milestones that we said, hey, we got to make sure that these things aren't very subjective. Like, we have to make them very objective. For example, on our accounting team, for our accounting manager, we laid out, we said, hey, we need to be able to get financials to the client by the 15th working day of the month. And that was average. That is baseline. Your next milestone is, can we get it to them in 12? And then excellent would be is we can get it to them in less than 10. Now, when we made it very, very clear, now when we're having conversations, it's no longer me saying, well, I feel like you're a little late. I can actually look at the objective data and I can say, all right, let's pull up all the clients that you manage. What day did we actually get them their financials? And then we can go back and we can compare. Like, hey, if I look at all 30 clients that you're responsible for managing, the average days was about 16. Well, if 15 is the very baseline, that tells me you underperformed the average level. We need to come up with a strategy to help you close that gap, because at a minimum, you should be 15 days. And so when we realize that, hey, by making very, very objective kind of measures and standards, it allowed us to create a sense of accountability where we could have conversations and we can actually talk about things to say, hey, here's how it should be. There's no reason for us to kind of go back and forth about this because, hey, we know what the standard is. We know what the milestones are. We can measure them and we can measure your actual performance. Now, in the accountability, I do want to emphasize this, is the accountability isn't really about just telling them that they did something wrong. When they are doing things right, we celebrate those things. We bring attention to them because accountability is really about not only just holding them accountable in areas where they did something wrong or they underperform, it's also about holding them accountable in areas and celebrating them in areas that they're doing stuff right. And so in that accountability, you want to make sure that you got a mix of both. Now, the last thing that I will say is reason why this whole underperformance or unproductivity of your staff falls on the leader is the last responsibility of the leader. The fourth, and I think this is probably the most important thing that a leader can do, and that is to make decisions. Now, there are a couple of decisions that a leader will make when it comes down to the performance of your team, it comes down to the performance of your business. The first thing is you got to understand, like, hey, did we set the right goal? Because you may be looking at your team's performance and you may realize that, hey, maybe we set the goal too high, or maybe we set the wrong goal. We're pointing people in the wrong direction. As a leader, you have to make a decision. Do we need to change the goal? Now, if your decision is, hey, nope, we have the right goal, we need to keep it where it is, then the next thing I would say is, do you need to move the milestones? Like, did you set the milestones too far apart, or do you need to bring them closer together? Like, do you need to change the way you measure progress towards the ultimate goal? And then the next thing is you got to ask yourself is, have you actually been having honest conversations with the people on your team? Because the biggest reason why people continue to be unproductive or they tend to underperform is because you haven't had an honest conversation with them. And that was a big challenge for me because before we started using the Golden Age framework, like, I really didn't have a method to help me have a honest conversation. A lot of it was really based off of feeling and kind of emotion. And so I had to really address that. And then the other thing that we need to ask ourselves is, all right, if the goal is good, the milestones are good, I'm having honest conversations with them, I need to ask myself, all right, do I have the right person on the team, or do I have them in the right position? Now, this is probably the hardest decision that a lot of leaders have to make, is coming to a decision of saying, yes, I have them in the right seat, or no, they are not in the right seat. Now, if you come to the conclusion that a person is not in the right position within your company, you got to make another decision and say, hey, am I going to move them to a new role, or am I going to help them exit the company? Now, I do not take that lightly because it is not a fun thing to, like, say, take a job away from a person. But at the end of the day, as a leader, if a person is in a role and you have identified that the goal is good, the milestones are good, you're having honest conversation you're giving them the feedback and the resources they need to be successful. But if they are still unable to be successful, then you have to do the mature and wise thing as a leader. And you have to come to the conclusion and say, how do I help this person get to a place where they can be successful? Because holding on to them in your organization because you're too afraid to make a decision is not going to be in their best interest. It's not going to be in their best interest, and it's not going to be in your organization's best interest. And so as a leader, you have to embrace that part of making decisions, because often I talk to leaders and I tell them about my own journey of like, hey, we struggled for a while because I wasn't willing to make a decision to help the people who were not the right fit for our organization. I wasn't able to make that decision and help them exit our company to get to a place that was a better fit for them. Because what I realized after having that conversation with a couple of employees, one of the things that it realized, it was like a weight was lifted off their shoulder, because I came to them, we had a conversation, I talked about it, and it wasn't an easy conversation to have. But afterwards, one of the things that they did is they said, thank you. And they were like, you know what? I was feeling like this role was a bit overwhelming. I was over my head, but I wasn't quite sure how to be honest or how to talk about it. But me being able to make that decision and go and have the conversation with them was a huge game changer. Now, there's probably going to be another episode where we dive a bit deeper into how you have that conversation when it is time for someone to leave an organization or to leave a role, because there's a lot of nuance. And I think there's some things that we probably can really expose and talk about that may feel uncomfortable. But I think when we kind of talk through it and share some experience of what we've learned and what we've learned from other leaders, then I think it will help a lot of people. But that is today's episode, where I really want to talk about the unpopular opinion of if your team is underperforming or unproductive, it is the leader's fault. And it is your fault because it is your responsibility to go through four things: to set the goals, establish the milestones, hold people accountable, and to make decisions. And as a leader, if you're not doing those four things, or you're missing one of those four things, your team is probably trying their best, but still underperforming or unproductive because you haven't done your job as a leader. So thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and share this episode with a friend, because we'll have more great advice on how to help you take your business from average to good to excellent, so you can be in the golden age of business. Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Golden Age of Business, where we guide you from average to good to excellent so that you can enjoy more success in your business.